Very good evening, everyone. My name is, let me introduce myself again. I'm the president of the, currently also a candidate under the doctorate program itself. So henceforth, I think the collaboration between SUSS, DBAC, SUSS, and the Middle East Institute, I think is a very fruitful one so far, thus far. And I think today we have actually reached our ME101 lecture series, session 5, okay? So we have one more to go, and we hope that we can have more of you who are online to actually join us, which will be happening on the 30th of October, same location, okay? So those that are online, you're welcome to join us on the 30th. So coming back to today's topic, I think it's a very interesting one. Now, the title for today's lecture series is on renewable energy. I think something that's, I think there are a lot of buzz about this, in today's sustainability world itself. So renewable energy being a source and preempting a sunset oil industry, oh my God. I think we all hope that we can actually gather some form of energy which can be used in our daily life, or in fact in the commercial world itself, that can replace the current fossil fuel, okay, largely. So I think today we are certainly very honored to have someone that's very renowned and expert in this area, and I would like to actually perhaps introduce her. She's none other than Dr. Aisha Al-Sharihi, if I have to pronounce it correct. She's a research fellow from the Middle East Institute, National University of Singapore. Now, her areas of research expertise and interests include clean energy policy and climate economics, policies and governance with a focus on the Arab region, okay? And she's also, following her PhD from 2016 to 2017, she was also a research officer at the London School of Economics and Political Science Middle East Center. She was also a former visiting scholar at the Arab Gulf State Institute in Washington in year 2017 and Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies in 2018. Now, before joining the Middle East Institute, she was also a research associate in the Climate and Environment program at the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center from 2019 to 2021. She holds a PhD from the Center of Environmental Policies at the Imperial College London and a Master's of Science and Bachelor of Science with distinctions in Environmental Science from Sultan Kabul universities. I think her accolade speaks a lot about her being an expert in today's subject. So without further ado, please help me to give a big round of applause to Dr. Aisha. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roger. So my lecture today is actually building on two previous lectures delivered by my colleague, Dr. Clement Shea and Dr. John Luke, on the economic development and economic diversification in the UAE and Saudi Arabia during previous sessions. So for me today, I will also look at the economic transformation and economic diversification, but I will focus largely on the transformation of the energy sector in the Gulf countries. And I will highlight more on the alternative energy. Okay. So as I mentioned, my lecture today will focus largely on the alternative energy, which is the fourth element. But given the unique economic context of the Gulf that is largely dependent on the oil and gas, I will start with giving a brief background of the oil and gas and its role in the economies of the Gulf. And then also, it is important also to understand the environment, the unique environmental conditions for the Gulf countries before we jump to speak about the clean energy transition in the Gulf. And I will explain how climate change is actually presenting a conundrum for the Gulf countries. Third, as I mentioned, my colleagues actually spoke about the post-oil future in terms of the social and economic transformation, but I will cover that very briefly. And then, of course, I will expand on the clean energy landscape in the Gulf. The last point, it will be, reflecting on our leadership message in the Middle East Institute, that what happens in the Middle East is really impacting us here in Singapore and everywhere else. So I will highlight on the Gulf Singapore energy relations and how the energy transition in the Gulf affecting Singapore. So starting with the first point, I have this picture, and I want to ask if any of you recognize the identity of the person in the picture. Okay, nobody. I also don't know him, but I found it really interesting to speak about this person. He is actually very important to the historical discovery of the oil and gas in the Gulf. He is the man behind the discovery of the oil. His name is Frank Holmes. He is of British New Zealand citizenship. In the 1920s, he actually established a company in London. And the idea behind establishing the company is to explore the oil in the Gulf countries. He is a geologist, and so in the 1920s, after establishing his company in London, he traveled to the Gulf region, and he visited a few Gulf leaders in the 1920s, including in Bahrain, in Kuwait, and in Saudi Arabia. He managed to, first of all, to convince the leaders in Bahrain to sign a concession for the oil discovery. And this is why Bahrain was the first country in which the oil concession was signed, and where the oil production was first produced and exported. So that was in 1923 for the concession, but the first production happened in 1932. The first exported cargo of oil from Bahrain was in 1934. And actually you might think Saudi Arabia came first, but Saudi Arabia came second. I think the idea, because Saudi Arabia got the confidence that, okay, it happened in Bahrain, maybe now we can explore the idea. And later on, Oman and ADNOC actually followed suit. So since then, actually, that was a major point for the transformation of the Gulf economies. So if we look at the Gulf countries today, they hold a large portion of global oil and gas reserves, and they are major producer and exporters of the crude oil globally. They hold around 23% of crude oil production and account for around 28% of the oil market share. And if we ask ourselves the question of how long the oil and gas will last in the Gulf countries, based on some statistics from the BP and based on if the amount of the reserves that are available, and if the Gulf countries continue with the same production rate of the oil and gas as of today, they will still, like the oil and gas will still last for another 50 to 100, more than 100 years. So there's a huge potential out there. So Gulf economies largely depend on the oil and gas export. So the oil that is produced, it's not, the majority of it is exported, but part of it is also processed domestically in refining and in the petrochemical industry, and then it is exported again. And that is like a major source of revenue for Gulf governments. So the majority of oil and gas exports from the Gulf actually goes, if you look at the chart at the on the right, you see Asia is the major market for the Gulf oil exports, topped by Japan, South Korea, India, and China. And then also, of course, like there's domestic need for the oil and gas, for industry, for the power generation, transport, enhanced oil recovery, and also aviation and shipping. So in a nutshell, the oil and gas actually have made the Gulf economies as we know them today. And if we look at the figures today, still the revenues from the hydrocarbons account for the majority of total government revenues. It is between 36, like for the UAE, but it can be more than 80% of total revenues for Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, for example. And here, I think we cannot speak about the oil and gas without speaking about the OPEC. And I think OPEC also, it's the grouping that made the Gulf countries, or both gave the Gulf countries the leadership position in the global energy market in a way that the OPEC grouping helped the Gulf countries to control a major share of the oil market. The OPEC actually accounts for around 37% of total crude oil production as of 2021. And if we want to take a step back on how OPEC was formulated, it was actually formulated in 1960 in the backdrop when the Seven Sisters, the large Western oil companies, have decided to actually sell the oil with lower price than the market price without the consultations of major producers like the Gulf countries. This is why in 1960, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela have met and formulated the OPEC grouping in Iraq. Now, the headquarters of the OPEC is in Vienna. It used to be in Geneva, and there are now 12 members. But in 2016, OPEC and non-OPEC declaration for cooperation was signed to include other major producers, the non-OPEC, including, for example, Russia and Oman and also Bahrain. This picture and this picture is just to show how the Gulf economies have transformed from actually pearl trade industry into what we know them today. So this is how the oil contributed in the formulation of the Gulf economies. So that is what we need to keep in mind when it comes to the oil and gas industry. The second important point that we need to remember is the unique environmental conditions for the Gulf countries, given the geographic locations and given the weather and the climate conditions of the Gulf. I don't know if you noticed that, but when I use the Google Maps and I look at the whole world map and look at the Middle East and North Africa, you can see like around the wall, it's almost like greenish, but specifically in the MENA region, it's like brown. And I think relatively the map is accurate in a way, because if you visit the MENA countries, you can see how the climate is arid and semi-arid climate. And so with that, actually climate change is making the region more volatile, and is exacerbating the different challenges, environmental challenges that the region face, including through the rise in the temperature. Now, already the temperature in the region is hitting more than 45 degrees Celsius during the summertime. And actually, it's already hit like the 50 degrees Celsius. And this is most recently because of the climate change is becoming more frequent, and it lasts for long period of time. The weather forecast that I brought here is like from my time living in Riyadh. I think I took it during July, but you can see I took it early in the morning, so it was 42 degrees Celsius, but in the peak hours, it can reach 47 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine how hot it is. What is important is it's affecting one of the most important religious season, the Hajj season. This year was recording one of the hottest years for the Hajj, and 100 of deaths were recorded during this Hajj season. Some related to the increase in the temperature, because most of the people also who goes to the Hajj are like of the elderly age. So it is a challenge that the Gulf countries are facing moving forward, and it will be exacerbated by the climate change. But I want just to mention, like in the Gulf, there is a winter season. So it cools down during the winter, but the summer is like really hot. And also looking at the global map, when it comes to the water stress, you can see as the color go dark, the water stress is high. And then the Gulf countries and the Middle East and North Africa countries in general are ranked one of the top water stressed region. And climate change, is changing the precipitation or the amount of the rainfall. It is either little rainfall in the region or too much, like that I'm going to show in terms of extreme weather events. So to tackle the water stress issue, the water desalination is seawater desalination is the technology in use in the region. And you can see that the towers are the highest in the Gulf region compared to the other parts of the world because the fresh water, the availability of the fresh water, like from the underground or the rivers, is relatively minimal. And this is why we depend, I say we because I'm from Oman, we depend on seawater desalination. Also, the region is exposed to extreme weather events, including, for example, the increase in the intensity and frequency of the sandstorms. As you can see here, a statement by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in 2021 in an interview, actually, when he was speaking about Saudi Vision 2030 and the economic transformation for the kingdom. He also spoke about the environmental challenges that face the kingdom, and he mentioned that when we were very young, the number of sandstorms were 70 to 80% less than what we are suffering from today. And it's true. It happens in Kuwait. It happens in Saudi Arabia. I lived in Riyadh, and also I brought this screenshot from my time in Saudi Arabia. Actually, like in the forecast, we check if tomorrow or today is a dusty weather. So the dusty weather is like very kind of intense during the transition between the winter and the summer. Kind of like the springtime, it becomes more intense. And I was exposed to this kind of the dust storm when I was in Riyadh. The other thing, as I mentioned, it's either little rainfall or there are times when there is too much of rainfall, and the region is most recently is being exposed to cyclones, especially Oman, because Oman is on the coast, but the other Gulf countries, because of the heavy rainfall that happens, in a matter of like 24 hours, you will see flash floods taking place. These are just examples, but I think some of you maybe heard about the flash floods and the heavy rainfall that took place this year in April in Oman and in the UAE. It is estimated that the rainfall in April was it was worth like 2 years in 24 hours. But unfortunately, because of the climate change, this kind of extreme weather events are becoming more intense and frequent in the region. The other thing is the sea level rise. It is important to mention this for the Gulf countries because most of the major cities of the Gulf countries and the major infrastructure like the water desalination plants, the power generation plants, and where the population are concentrated is in the coastal area. So the exposure to sea level rise is a real issue, especially for the small state islands like Bahrain and Qatar. So now I want to explain why this is a climate conundrum for the Gulf. So as we mentioned, the oil and gas is really important for the Gulf economy. But again, because of this, extreme climate conditions, oil and gas is also important source for the Gulf countries to weather these extreme climate conditions. The oil and gas revenues have helped the Gulf countries to import the technologies that are needed for cooling, for example, the air conditioning, and for also importing the technology for water desalination, and also for the securing the food imports. The Gulf countries depend more than 80% of their food from imports. So the oil and gas, in a way, is a less for the Gulf countries. However, it is at the same time creating a new economic challenge for the Gulf country, especially with this global decarbonization movement. And last year in the UAE at COP28, there was the agreement to transition away from the fossil fuel. So, so this is the challenge. I think that the Gulf countries or the Gulf economies are actually concerned about today planning ahead for the economic transformation and energy transition as well. So what are the Gulf countries are doing to deal with this new challenge of economic of global economic decarbonization, transition away from the fossil fuels? So I want to mention before jumping into those strategies, the Gulf countries are already the economies because of this dependence on the oil and gas, already like vulnerable to the fluctuations on the oil prices. For example, it hit hard during the COVID because the oil prices went really minus. So the decarbonization is an additional challenges that comes to attention. So what are the post-oil strategies? I summarized it into 3 major strategies. As we mentioned, the oil and gas is gonna last for another 50 to 100 years. So it is not really like logical to just leave it in the ground, but the Gulf countries try to monetize the oil and gas reserves as much as possible, but thinking more in a how to do it in a sustainable manner. The second is the economic diversification and the development of non-oil sectors. I'm not going to go in details into that because my colleagues already covered this in previous lectures. And then the third thing, I think I will show like how the Gulf countries are trying to speed up the development of alternative energy resources. So a big visit to the monetizing of the oil and gas resources. I brought this figure which shows how the energy market will look like in 2050 if we want to be climate compatible and hit the net zero goals or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This figure is from the International Energy Agency. I think other organizations may not agree with this figure and this estimation, but this one estimates that the oil, gas, and coal will decline by 2050, and it will fall from, for example, for oil, from more than 100 units to something around 42, which is a big decline. So this is kind of bringing a challenge for the oil producers, not only in the Gulf, but also globally. So for the Gulf countries, I think the Gulf governments, how they see it, maybe, I don't know if you are aware that the oil that comes from the Gulf region is low carbon and is low cost. So this is kind of, giving the Gulf countries a chance to secure the shrinking market that we see in 2050 because they have low carbon fuel. And they employ different strategies on how to use the oil and gas reserves as of today. For the UAE, I think the UAE is trying to boost the oil production as quickly as possible. In comparison, for Saudi Arabia, it seeks to elongate the life of the oil and benefit from the market share in the long run up to 2050 and maybe beyond. Qatar is a major gas producer, so is looking at it as the natural gas will be, the transitional fuel. So it will be the leader in terms of the natural gas in the next 30 to 50 years. And also when it comes to the oil and gas, as I mentioned, the market will shrink in the future, but to secure markets, the Gulf countries are securing long-term, partnerships with major energy consumers, especially in Asia, like in China, South Korea, Japan. So they are co-investing, for example, in refineries and petrochemical industries in different parts of the world, but the majority of those investments are in Asia. And then on the economic diversification, again, so the 6 Gulf countries, we can see the logos of the economic diversifications for the 6 Gulf countries. Actually, what motivated the development of those strategies is the drop in the oil prices mostly and the volatility to the oil price fluctuations. For Saudi Arabia, for example, Vision 2030 was developed in 2016 after the sharp drop in the oil prices in 2014. However, as I mentioned, now the decarbonization and the looming horizon of the decline for the oil and gas because of this climate compatible strategies, it is becoming more and more important for the Gulf countries to develop non-oil sectors. And so the targeted sectors here, I extracted them from the different economic diversification strategies in the Gulf. However, if you are interested in figures, I think the Gulf countries still need to work hard in improving the development of the non-oil sectors because they still rank in the bottom of the global economic diversification index. So again, my colleagues covered a lot, expanded on this a lot in the previous lectures. I just wanted to give a snapshot on that. And now this is the main focus of the lecture today. Sorry it took so long, but I'll try to also be quick here. So it was important really to understand this context before we jump into the energy transition landscape. So yes, for me, when I do my research, I mostly look at how the Gulf countries are progressing in renewable energy and other clean energy industries like the hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, energy efficiency, solar, and so on. Actually, only in the last 2 years or so, the Gulf countries announced net zero goals. For me, because I have been researching the region for a long time, that was really a surprise for me and kind of unexpected announcement that came from the region. But actually before that, the Gulf countries have already started to invest in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and of course, establishing the institutional capacity for this transition. So we go into these, try to cover them as much as possible. So the energy transition, because we mentioned the oil and gas sector play a major role in the Gulf economies. So it shouldn't be that the national oil companies do not take any role, but also I think for me, this kind of unexpected for the region, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But now the national oil companies are also kind of under pressure also to take role in the energy transition, announcing net zero goals, but also contributing in the investments in the clean energy. In terms of renewable energy, I like this chart. It is how I follow the region, and then I look at it every year. Well, the total installed capacity as of 2021 now is up to 3,500 megawatts. It is not actually huge in terms of how much it contributes to the energy mix. It is actually relatively small. But what I find interesting from this figure is the gradual increase, or at least dramatic increase over the last few years. And what I also want to mention in the Gulf region, the lowest cost of renewable energy production is actually in the Gulf region. It used to be in Dubai, but it's currently in Saudi Arabia. We know the renewable energy, one of the major factors that make the investors reluctant to invest in renewable is the high cost of it. But the Gulf countries have managed to secure lowest cost of renewable energy production. I can expand on this more because Gulf countries deploy different strategies when it comes to investing in renewable energy. For example, Oman depends on the strategy of build, own, and operate. So they let the operator own the plant and take the financial risk, but at the same time, the government guarantee the offtake of renewable energy that is produced. In the UAE, it's almost similar concept, but in the UAE also the banks play a role because they cover a majority of the debt for the investors in renewable energy, and they guarantee the offtake of the electricity produced from renewable. And they also provide designated land for renewable energy investment. So for the investor, they know they don't need to worry about whether there's a solar or wind that is available. And also, I think it's also good to mention that the Gulf countries, especially the state-owned companies in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are not only investing domestically, but they are investing globally, including in South Asia and East Asia and Pacific. But they are also investing in Europe, but the majority is in this part of the world. And hydrogen, I think at the moment is a major sector that the Gulf governments foresee as an alternative for the oil and gas. And there are many projects in the pipeline, as I list them here. In Bahrain, in Oman, in Saudi, and in the UAE. Perhaps you heard about the NEOM, the futuristic city in Saudi Arabia, where the major hydrogen production and export will take place. It's actually on the Red Sea. In Oman also use the port of Daqam as a designated area where the majority of the hydrogen will produce and exported. And as I mentioned, is actually really gaining momentum. The governments are deploying national hydrogen strategies and building the institutional capacity to ramp up the hydrogen production and export. And also looking ahead, the hydrogen partnerships is already taking place. Actually, one of the challenges for the hydrogen industry at the moment is everyone is like wants to produce hydrogen, so the supply is kind of like ramping up, but the demand is really limited. So to secure off-takers of the hydrogen that is produced, the Gulf countries are also trying to find different partnership who can, uptake the hydrogen that's produced. Already, for example, Saudi Arabia sent a demonstrative cargo of blue ammonia to South Korea and to Japan. Oman is having a partnership with Germany very closely. Another also area that develops around the clean energy sector is the carbon capture and storage. There is a big hope to really expand the sector, but at the moment there are 3 carbon capture facilities, 2 in Saudi Arabia and 1 in the UAE. Another area is the expanded use of the electric vehicles across the Gulf countries. Now, if you visit the Gulf, maybe you can spot a Tesla or another electric vehicle, like the Chinese electric vehicles in the Gulf. The Gulf countries have set targets to increase the use of the electric vehicles and the charging stations, but they are also hoping to be manufacturing hub for the electric vehicles. Saudi Arabia, for example, wants to have its own brand. It is called SEER, to manufacture the electric vehicle domestically and then to export it, but they also target to use the different components of the electric vehicle either from Saudi Arabia or from the region. The UAE was the first country in the region to start manufacturing and have its own electric vehicle brand. I think one of them that was announced is Rabdan. Okay, I think this is going to be my last point. I have done 35 minutes as promised. So how does that influence Gulf, Singapore, energy relations? Actually, Singapore and the Gulf had long energy relations. Singapore already importing 2/3 of its crude oil from the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Also, Singapore already receives LNG, the majority of it from Qatar, but some of it also from Oman. The relations, the diplomatic relations and the economic relations between the Gulf and Singapore has been actually taken momentum in the recent years. Actually, there was visits in last year between different Gulf leaders to Singapore or vice versa. Singapore is the major trade partner with the Gulf, and from the Gulf perspective, the UAE is the major trade partner with Singapore. Singapore is the only ASEAN country to sign free agreement with the GCC, and there are already some there's a comprehensive partnership with the UAE, but there are joint committees between Singapore, Saudi Arabia, and Oman, where they meet in regular basis to discuss economic partnerships. When it comes to the energy and the climate, actually, if you check the statements, the joint statements that come from the official visits between the leaders, major areas of cooperation between Singapore and the Gulf is the health, education, tourism, hospitality, digital economy. But now you can see areas on the climate and the hydrogen and other areas on the energy transition are also central to those joint statements. So I listed here, the mutual energy transition, green economy aspirations, which create area of cooperation between the two. Hydrogen, because for Singapore, we know that Singapore depends on the natural gas. The majority of the energy mix is natural gas, but at the moment it's pipeline natural gas from Malaysia and Indonesia. But Singapore aims to transition to LNG. So I think natural gas will be a major component for cooperation, at least between Singapore and Qatar in the short term throughout the energy transition process. But then again, Singapore aspires to use the green hydrogen in the future as an alternative for the natural gas. And Gulf countries aspire to produce the green hydrogen. Nuclear small modular reactors is also another area of mutual interest, and so on and so forth. I'm going to give a few examples on Singapore investments in the clean energy in the Gulf. This is my research, what I found. There are a few Singaporean companies investing, for example, in Oman, SimCorp Utilities investing in solar power plant in Oman, but it's also has already invested in Salalah Independent Water and Power Plant. In the UAE, there's a cooperation between G-Star and UAE-based, Siraj Group to build solar module factory. And also I want to mention the last air carbon exchange. This is a carbon market company. Carbon markets are also gaining momentum in the Gulf countries. And this is Air Carbon Exchange, a Singapore-based company which has cooperation with Abu Dhabi Global Market in building trading exchange and clearing house for carbon trading. I did 40 minutes, but this is the last slide. It shows the areas for cooperation when it comes to climate and energy between, broadly speaking, Southeast Asia and the Gulf. Food security, water management are common challenges. Climate finance can be an area for cooperation is actually in terms of climate finance. Already Masdar signed a power purchase agreement for renewable energy project in Indonesia and in Malaysia. There is cooperation also when it comes to mangrove lands, building mangrove trees in Indonesia. As I mentioned, clean energy is an area for cooperation between the two, and carbon markets. I think the Gulf can be the buyers of the carbon credits, but the Southeast Asia can be the seller of the carbon credits. I'll stop here, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, I think it's a very, while waiting, anyone from the floor which would like to pose any questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, please introduce yourself, and then you can pose a question to Prof. Aisha.
Thank you, Aisha. My name is Ling Jing.
Is it on?
I'm a research fellow at MEI and US, or nearer, sorry. Okay, so thank you for your sharing. I found it very informative. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about international cooperations? For example, how do you see China's role influencing like the Gulf countries' transition to renewable energy, considering like China right now has a emerging strong economic ties within the region. And also China has its own ambition for this target. Thank you.
Can I ask?
Yes, you can, please.
Okay, so thank you very much, Linton. So it's an important question because the China-Gulf relation has been largely revolved around the energy export from the Gulf to China. China is a major market for the Gulf oil and gas. However, in the recent years, the Gulf-China relations have been kind of like economic relations, expanding beyond the oil and gas to cover other non-hydrocarbon sectors. Actually, in the UAE, for example, it goes to the technology, tourism, real estate, healthcare, but is now like also the role of China is also expanding when it comes to renewable energy investments. Actually, if we look at the electric vehicles, when I showed, actually most of the electric vehicles that are imported in the regions, China kind of like coming fast to the market. And it is almost dominating the electric vehicle markets. And I also mentioned that, for example, the Gulf countries are in a position to manufacture the electric vehicles. But if we look at the, the partnerships in those manufacturing, it is mostly with China's companies. It is also true when it comes to the finance of renewable energy projects in the region. For example, there are few projects which are financed by Chinese banks, including in Oman, but also the construction and the co-investments also Chinese companies are involved in solar and wind projects in the region.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Aisha. Perhaps I would like to ask the questions to Prof. Prof, being a oil production country itself and being part of OPEC, right? It has been the center of Gulf leadership in terms of OPEC, and with this, it actually has political influence in the global energy market. Now, how do you see the energy transition play out in shaping the future of OPEC? When the reliance on fossil fuel will diminish, and of course, renewable energy taking on a more central stage. All right, so how do you see the future of OPEC itself?
Okay. So this is a difficult question, actually. So there was a graph where I mentioned that the demand for the oil and gas could decline because of this global decarbonization. But this is still remain controversial because of the speed of the decarbonization that is taking place. It is not at the speed where it has affected the demand already. There are some signs that the demand, for example, for the oil has declined because of the use of the electric vehicles. International Energy Agency, for example, estimate that around 1 to 2 million barrels of oil has been cleared from the market because of the electric vehicles. So that is kind of a sign that energy transition started to affect the market. But as of today, it's not a big or a significant change. But and I think this is how the Gulf governments are thinking at the moment, if the oil and gas demand decline in the future, then again, I think it's going to be kind of like a win for OPEC grouping, because as mentioned, they are low cost, low carbon producers. So when I showed the chart, like even though there will be a decline in the oil and gas in a net zero world, but the share of the oil and gas in the market will remain there. So it is an opportunity for the OPEC grouping to secure the share in that market, because they are low cost, low carbon producers. And I think one of the strategies that the OPEC grouping can do, so today, like the strategy they do is to cut the production or to cut the supply to keep the prices in the market high. But I think when it comes to a net zero world, when the demand will be carbon specific, I think the OPEC grouping can, use this kind of like low carbon fuel as an opportunity, to mandate their members to cut the production in proportion of the carbon content. So again, and also they can use it an opportunity to put a premium on the oil. So even though like the supply, is going to be high actually at the time, and so the demand is small. So maybe the prices will be low. So even if the Gulf countries, put a premium, they can also keep the premium lower than the other producers, so they can maintain the market share in the future, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think that's an excellent answer. Okay, any other questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
Hello, Dr. Aisha. My name is Mahmoud. I think one of the charts that you showed, it showed around the renewable energies in all the Gulf countries. And I think UAE was the fastest expanding one. But I think Qatar had a very small one there. And even later in the slide around the hydrogen initiatives, Qatar had 0 hydrogen initiatives, right? Is Qatar a bit not as fast as the other kind of countries in terms of renewable energy? And is there kind of a reason for that?
For Qatar, actually, I had the data up to 2021. But Qatar ramped up renewable energy investments in the lead up to the World Cup. Actually, the investment has increased, but maybe that is for diplomatic and self-image reasons. In terms of hydrogen, yes, Qatar at the moment doesn't have plans for hydrogen, except they announced a hydrogen production plant most recently, I think last year. I think for Qatar, because it is a major natural gas producer, so they see natural gas as a transition fuel. So they are kind of more relaxed with natural gas at this stage. And I think most of the energy consumers globally also see natural gas as the alternative until the renewable energy and other clean energy mature, because the technology is still not up to the scale and the maturity to meet the demand. And we can reflect on Russia-Ukraine war and how that impacted Europe. Europe is the most advanced when it comes to renewable energy. But again, when the crisis with Russia happened, they couldn't do without natural gas. They actually went to the US and then to the Gulf to secure long-term agreements for the natural gas. So I think renewable energy is still way for it to go. It's not to the stage where it's needed to be.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor? Perhaps I'll probably pose the next question. Prof. Aisha, now, renewable energy in your definition is really not I would say the strength of what the Gulf region is actually having right now. There are certainly other blocks in like what you have mentioned in Europe that has more matured in terms of technology, in terms of harnessing natural resources for energy itself. So how do you see the Gulf itself? Does it seems like a desperate move in order to actually recap or recoup some of the economic advantage that they're having by nature of their production of or their resource in terms of oil right now? Do you see it as something that they can compete perhaps in future, or is just a knee-jerk reaction that they have to do something?
Okay, so I answer it maybe as a perspective from the Gulf economists. I think because of the economic vulnerability to the oil prices and because of this looming decarbonization, I think the Gulf countries do know that depending on the oil is not a sustainable business in the medium and the long term. So I think in a way, yes, they are desperate to make the move. And I think they know for sure that they were successful like in depending on the oil export revenues. But they know that in the future, if there's no demand for the oil and gas, they will need to build a national security. And this is why there are initiatives, as I mentioned, in terms of the manufacturing, in terms of trying to enhance the innovation domestically. At the moment, the way it happens, it really happens in partnership with other nations, like with China, with Europe, and with the US. And for the long history of the Gulf, most of the technologies that are used in the Gulf are imported from outside. And actually the money is from, the revenues that comes from the oil and gas. So this is not really ensuring the national security of the Gulf. So whether they will be competitive, the way I see it, because I'm also from the Gulf, because I also lived in Saudi Arabia, I think the Gulf governments know that it's important to build the human capacity nationally and to try to enhance the innovation ecosystem. Most recently, I saw that across the Gulf countries, everyone establishing innovation ecosystem to enhance innovation through research or also through the big companies in different sectors, in food security, in renewable energy, in agriculture, and other areas and even in defense and security, actually. But whether they are competitive, I think not at this stage, but at least there is a start.
Good answer from Prof. Aisha. Any other questions from the floor? Otherwise, then I'll take your questions from those that are online. So I do have someone asking this online itself. Now, considering the shift within the energy sector, that we notice some competition among the Gulf countries, governments obtaining the leadership itself. So how do you think that this will take effect on internal relationship and the situation of the Gulf itself? So I presume, with the growth in terms of renewable energy, I think the questions perhaps were asked. Do you see there's a shift in terms of the Gulf countries, whosoever they are taking leaders in this area itself, or in the area of economy, or perhaps even politics itself?
Okay. I think it is the hope for the Gulf countries to retain the leadership that they had in the oil and gas market. This is the hope, and this is why there are a lot of initiatives in different sectors, including the hydrogen sector. I think the most ambitious hydrogen projects that are announced globally are in the Gulf countries, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, and in the UAE, because they have long-term plans to secure large share of the hydrogen market in the future. So I would keep it there. It is a hope to retain the leadership.
So, so the leadership, or it will remain as status quo, as what you would probably foresee in the near future. Now, there's a questions perhaps I would like to pose. What would you say in terms of the major investment or investment arm around in Singapore itself, Singapore companies? What do you foresee are the future opportunities for investment in the Gulf region?
Okay, right. So between Singapore and the Gulf country, most of investments, for example, for the Gulf in Singapore, it is actually in the oil sector because Singapore is an oil trading hub. So Gulf countries have investments on the oil storage in Singapore. But from Singapore side, in the Gulf, Singapore has helped Gulf countries to invest in the engineering and the infrastructure, mainly in, for example, the petrol vessels for the Gulf, because the piracy in the trade routes is a major concern for the Gulf economies, and it is also a major concern for Singapore. So this is one area where Singapore helped the Gulf countries to invest in. But I think it's also shifting, as I mentioned, towards renewable energy. But other areas where Singapore invests in the Gulf is cybersecurity. They help Gulf countries in cybersecurity, in the finance, in the banking, and also in the hospitality. But now is also shifting to the digital economy and renewable energy, as I mentioned.
Okay, I think if there are no other questions, I think I would like to give a word of thanks to Prof. Aisha Al-Sarihi for being present with us today on the topic of renewable energy itself. I think it certainly is a very interesting topic and that will affect everyone not even in the near future, as in now, okay? So thank you again for being with us tonight. So at this juncture, I would like to announce that, our next session will be on the 30th of this month, which will be happening in the same location in Mountbatten Square, within the premise of the Marketing Institute of Singapore. So, so with that, we'd like to give a big round of applause to Prof. Aisha with us tonight. So hope to see you on the 30th. So those online, we hope that you will be able to join us physically, which will be our last session for this this whole series itself. So till then, we'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.